But on a more serious note, you may know that someone is now doing a PhD on the meta-poetry of the poem. That is, the words, the chat around the poem at a poetry reading. And that aspect of the poetry reading is, in a sense, the inspiration for this book, The Deep Heart Core, Irish Poets Revisit a Touchstone Poem. And for Shakespeareans out there, that doesn't mean a poem about the jester out of As You Like It. The relevance of the title, The Deep Heart's Core, is that it comes from W.B. Yeats' The Lake Island Free, which is the only poem of his that we have on record of W.B. doing his own introduction, telling us how he came to write it. So Dedalus Press has not only been responsible for publishing so many poems and so many poets over the years, but is now also effectively publishing a poetry reading between book covers, because what you have here is over 100 poets telling you how, why, where or when they wrote one of their key poems. So that's 100 poets being their own critic, their own literary biographer, their own DJ setting up the next track, maybe. So today's reading is both a Dedalus reading and a Deep Heart's Core celebration, and of course this book is on sale on David's bookstall just outside here, as are the books of the poets here. So all three of our readers this morning are Dedalus poets, as I've said, and all three have their poems in and its introduction in this fascinating survey of contemporary Irish poets and their inspirations. Now, you mightn't think that the weather here in Armagh this morning is that brilliant, but when I had a Dedalus Press reading at the Troubadour 10 years ago, yes, Pat, it was 10 years ago, headed up, of course, by editor Pat Boran, who's also a very fine poet himself with 5 collections and well known for hosting the poetry programme on RTE. That particular night was marked by torrential rain, such as we haven't seen in London for many years, with the poets arriving drenched, as if they were an advert for Ireland's weather, as well as Irish poetry. You know, the kind of rain you only ever see in films like John B. Keane's The Field, or Robert Flaherty's Man of Iron, or in Ryan's Daughter. And one of the poets, Fergus Allen, didn't make it at all that night and ended up marooned in a train carriage outside a flooded railway station in Berkshire. But it was a great night for the rest of us, drying out. Jessica Traynor too has read at the Troubadour in the New Voices showcase, but also because she was the winner of the 2015 Troubadour International Poetry Prize, which I don't judge, so I can't claim the credit for spotting her poem, but I'm sure it wasn't hard to spot that talent. Jessica's first collection is Liffey Swim from Dedalus 2014 and was shortlisted for the Strong Shine Award. And I can't remember what the weather was like when Jessica read in London in January 2016, but I do remember the weather was positively Mediterranean when I first got to meet Enda Coyle-Greene. She was a winner in a competition I judged, the annual Lake Orta Poetry Prize on an island in the middle of Lake Orta in Italy. My next encounter with her work wasn't quite so Mediterranean. I was spending a fortnight in Henrik Boll's cottage in Achill and found 3 of Enda's books on the library shelves there, including Map of the Last, which is Dedalus 2013, which kept me going through some wild, wintry, rainy weather. In fact, I went back to London with windburn on one side of my face from one stormy night walking home across the mountain. I'm sure you remember some such weather. So, poets for all seasons, poets for every kind of weather, poets whose voices you will hear today, poets whose books you will want to buy, as well as the anthology of inspirations, and poets you will hear again and again in your own deep heart's core. Please welcome Pat Boran, Enda Coyle-Greene and Jessica Traynor.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for that lovely introduction. And it's such a pleasure to be here in this amazing festival with its fantastic lineup, and how lovely to be part of that. So I'm going to read a couple of poems from my first collection and place the poem that's featured in the Deep Heart's Core in the middle of that by way of some kind of contextualisation. Because, you know, interestingly, I think whenever you have to come up with a little set list, to use the DJ terminology again, for a reading, you have to think about what is it that's bringing these poems together. And I think in my first collection in Liffey Swim, there are a lot of poems of place, and I think my Deep Heart's Core poem is certainly a poem of place. So I'm going to start off my reading with the eponymous poem from my first collection, Liffey Swim, which, like a lot of poems of place, or a lot of kind of, I suppose, heartfelt responses to plays came from being away. And this poem was actually written in London on the back of a theatre ticket at about 1 a.m. while sleeping on a friend's sofa in a bedsit there. And I think sometimes this is being away from places when you have the most vivid, heartfelt connection to it. Liffey Swim. In the dream, the Blessington Street basin fills with the Liffey's stout bottled waters, but still the swimmers come in droves on the stray sovereign of an Irish summer's day. The river courses towards the quays, turning concrete roadways to canal banks that shrug their shoulders into dark water. A man rises, seal-like in his call of silt to wave. At the sluice gate, where the river bends out of sight between toppling buildings, a black dog jumps again and again into water. And there, at the edge of vision, my parents, ready to join the swimmers, gesture their cheerful farewells. I think there's a weather theme emerging there as well, actually, which we managed to carry on. The next poem I'm going to read was featured this year on one of the little pocket poetry cards that Poetry Ireland produced for Poetry Ireland Day. There's a lot of poetries in that sentence, but it was a lovely little project and nice to be in kind of great company with it. And there were a lot of northern poets featured as well. And they're just nice little things that people, they little bits of ephemera, they show up in places and they travel quite widely. So I was glad that this particular poem travelled with them. And it's, I suppose, a poem about those dormant friendships, those friendships that we kind of carry with us from our childhood that we may not think about in a conscious way for years, but that are kind of filling up our subconscious in some way and continuing on in some level of our experience. And this is called Letters from Mount Fuji. From the top of Mount Fujiyama, I send you letters, written on square pages, then folded in as many different patterns as a snowflake. I drop them onto thin air, watch them fall into the world. Open one. In it is a picture from your childhood. Look at it. It melts in your hand like the question I ask you, caught on a breeze, and your answer taken by the river to the sea. Even through this constant year-devouring snow, I will always send you letters. So another kind of concern that runs through my first collection is a kind of a nerdish fascination with history. In particular, this poem was inspired by kind of an anecdote. In 2013, we were celebrating the centenary of the 1913 lockout in Dublin, and Robert Balla, the artist, designed this tapestry, and each of the panels was to be embroidered by a different community group. And one of my friends, who's the archivist at the Abbey Theatre, was part of one of these community groups. She tried to get me involved, and I did a few bits of stitching, and they said, "No, you're fine. It's okay. You can come and observe the odd time." But she's obviously a stickler for historical accuracy. And when the particular panel arrived that they were to stitch, there was an inconsistency noted, and that inspired this poem, which is called Larkin's Beard. When the time came to stitch the tapestry commemorating 1913 and its lockout, controversy broke out over Larkin's beard. You see, it was a fake worn to disguise him as he addressed the crowds from the window of the Imperial Hotel, and when the DMP men came to take him away in the famous photo, there's the beard sat on his face, shrouding that big mouth. But when Bobby Balla's sketches arrive for us to work up, Larkin is beardless. Our sewing circle sits, stares from photo to sketch, from long-jawed Larkin to the bearded gent of historical fact. We decide to sew on the beard. Each strand is stretched taut through the cloth, fingers are pricked, hardened, tendons pulled, but it's truth we're sewing. We follow the weave of history, bond over our small rebellion as we contour the moustache, gradate our silks from black to grey. When the woman from the committee comes and sees the beard, she is horrified by its hirsute challenge to the narrative we've been told to represent. and we all get a lecture on artistic license before the beard is unpicked. So my poor friend, the archivist, I think she's squirming somewhere at the notion that I'm passing on this story still. Just one more kind of poem of place before I move on to my Deep Hearts Core poem. And this is a poem called Sackville Place, which is set in a kind of a singularly unromantic location on Sackville Place in the inner city Dublin, in Dublin 1. I worked in the Abbey for a long time, which sounds glamorous, but most of what I seemed to do would be getting keys cut for various rehearsal rooms to which we'd lost the keys. So I spent a lot of time sitting in this tiny little family-run cobbler's shop, which has since closed down, actually. The man who owned it passed away, and there's been nobody to take it on. And again, not a very romantic or pretty place, but a place that I kind of felt a connection to. Sackville Place. From the cobbler's shop I watch rain paint the pavements brown. A smell of sealant and burnt metal hangs below the streetlights. An old woman folds her umbrella, says to the cobbler, "When you think of the grandchildren, you wonder, did I ever love my own kids enough?" Outside, buses snort, puddles pucker. The click of crutches keeps time with the key wheel as it spins. The cobbler smiles and shakes his head. "Ah no," he says, "ah no." So I think that kind of brings us neatly on to my poem in the Deep Hearts Core, which is, again, another kind of impression of where I live in the north inner city Dublin. I live in Ballybock, which translates to poor town, which will make some sense of the title of this poem. And I was living away from the place for a year, and again, I mean, it's a place with a lot of history, and there's a lot to love in it, but not a lot visually to love in it, I think. You know, again, being away, living in Scotland at the time, I just found myself being struck by some really vivid impressions of the place. And I suppose this is a poem where I haven't done a lot of explanation in terms of the poem itself about what the imagery means. So I think, you know, if you read my introduction, you'll get a sense of some of the places that are referenced. But just to give you a little insight, it makes reference to a news story in the area about a young man throwing himself off the canal bridge. And it was one of those stories where it was reported and there was never any follow-up on it, but just the kind of the image of that loneliness struck me. And I remembered when I'd heard it, having come over the canal bridge at Ballybock late at night and seeing a young man on his own staring into the water there, probably completely unrelated, but it stuck with me. There are also a number of derelict convents in the area. We're not that far away from Stanhope Street, from the Magdalen Laundry there, so there's a lot of that kind of shameful architectural heritage around that hasn't, you know, that we haven't figured out how to deal with yet, I suppose. And then, while I was house hunting in the area, we looked at a house in the North Strand which we fondly christened the Murder House because it looked like something from the set of a horror film, and we were bidding on it and we didn't get it in the end. But then it transpired that the person who did buy it took up the floorboards and found a huge number of improvised War of Independence era bombs underneath there. So, you know, it's an interesting area. Yes, so that'll give you a little bit of a clue to the kind of the images that are going on underneath the surface here. And this is scenes from a poor town. Street lights turn the black world orange. The moon is a lie the canal repeats and repeats. A man on the bridge agrees. See his shape blacken the moon on water until it vanishes. Outside the derelict convent, a shape moves, white-bibbed, sharp-beaked, the street lamp caught in its eye. On the North Strand, bombs sleep under floorboards, below the tide line, nestled truffles. Their intricacies perennial, they glide through the night on greased rails, the dark hours, the slow hours. And I suppose to totally undermine the mood of that poem, actually, one of the references I didn't mention was there is a kind of a hint as to the shape of a nun in the middle of the poem, but actually the reference also refers to an incident where some kids from the area stole a penguin from the zoo and let it loose on the street, and it was picked up outside the convent, which I just thought was too absurd. So I'm just going to read 3 more short poems. These are newer poems. The first one was inspired by, I've been doing a lot of reading around John Berger. I think probably a lot of us have over the last couple of months, and looking back at the old documentaries and things like that. And I came across this really, really lovely interview where the interviewer noted that he kept talking about these people, these interesting figures from history, as if they were still alive. And in particular, he had this little kind of crafted matchbox set, and he was talking about wanting to give it to Rosa Luxemburg, as if she was still out there ready to receive gifts. And so the epigraph from this poem references that. Matches for Rosa. I wanted to give them to Rosa Luxemburg, who loved birds and flames. These matches are a gift for Rosa. I'll send her a text first, so she will expect them where she lives now, in a room on the other side of water. Even the dead can light a fire with the right tinder, like these matryoshka matchboxes, each one hiding a smaller lacquered case and a painted Russian songbird. Perhaps each bird with its slow, deep eyes, its harlequin flashes of scarlet or gold, will be reborn as a phoenix in that other place, where the dead live, sparks catch quicker. And maybe in return for my gift, this woman so in love with fire and flight will send her blazing birds to my pyre. I've had the honour recently of having a poem included in this forthcoming anthology on Francis Ledwidge that Tom French has been assembling, which is a lovely kind of mixed offering of bits of essay and prose and poetry. And I sent him this poem for it, and I'm glad he chose it, but I was quite surprised, as sometimes happens. But it came from a conversation with the poet Tom McCarthy, where he was talking about the kind of dying art of Morse code, and saying, you know, in his generation it was something that people occasionally learned. And in a sense now it's one of these, it's another one of these languages that's being consigned to history, and we all know about it, but very few people actually know enough about Morse code anymore. So anyway, this poem is called Morse. He taps teaspoon on mug, wipes crumbs into the palm of his hand, dot, 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 dash. But the radio posts are all closed now, gone like the long wave that swept its arc through the nighttime sky, sending whispers to corners where thoughts lay waiting to be caught. He thinks a falling away has occurred, the kind that drops the scales from the world's eyes and loses the world in the process. And though no one is listening, Morse for him is everywhere, a second heartbeat thrumming the morning, the click of his bicycle spokes, the faint but certain patter of applause from the TV, the fractious beeping of car alarms. All messages shouted into the world, lost. He tries not to listen, as once during an episode he tried to stop counting his footsteps, but on an April morning at the bus stop, umbrella unfurled, spring rain on the canvas, the memory of kisses, the crackle of a drowned fire somehow still burning, makes the last man at the last listening post smile. I'm going to finish with a poem that is going to be included in an anthology that celebrates, I think, 2,000 years since Metamorphosis by Ovid was written. So people have been asked to respond to some of the stories in Metamorphosis, and I came across this figure, probably one of the lesser known figures, called Ossiro, who was the human daughter of a wise centaur. She was punished by the gods for telling her father his true fate, and was turned into a horse. Ossiro. You'll never deny her, they said at my birth, the spit of her father. What they didn't say. Not cursed with your horns, hooves, lusts, feuds, the frantic burrowing of your blood back towards the beast. I had some of your stubbornness in me, Mulish, my teacher said, hearing in my questions the echo of a Janet's bray. When you hit me and said it hurt you more, I could never quite summon the duty to believe you. But I knew you. I knew the patterns in your rage, could plot them like a chess player, anticipate each move you'd make as disputes became job losses, final notices, long nights alone with all your knowledge. One morning I opened my mouth to speak, heard my voice sing your truth with such perfect pitch, it was as if I'd swallowed the blackbird's tongue. You cursed me then for seeing you as you were, a hobbled half-breed who couldn't forgive his daughter's evolution. But this time the pain was worse for you, seeing me gallop, freed of the words that choked you, my muscles marbled in sunlight, my throat singing hoarse to all and no one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, especially for inviting me here today. The last time we met, the weather was indeed a lot better, and I think Orta is one of my favourite places. It's indescribably beautiful, isn't it? I'm going to start with my poem from the Deep Heart's Core and try and contextualise it. I think I have a few words to say about it, but not as much as I have in the anthology itself, because my piece is quite long and goes into a lot of technical stuff for some reason, which I'm not going to read now. You'll be bored. The only thing I will say is that poems to me, and to anybody who makes poems, come from very different places. Most of the time it's a frustratingly nebulous impulse, nothing more than that. Sometimes it's an image, sometimes it's somebody says something to you and sets something off in the part of your head where poems come from. Occasionally with me, anyway, it's a word like, rather like a note given by a pianist to a singer, acts as a kind of key to set everything else in motion. When I was asked for a Touchstone poem, this one struck me as probably one of the most unusual poems I've ever written, insofar as I got the title first, Metathesis, and I hadn't a clue what the word meant. And I probably shouldn't be admitting that. I should probably be pretending to be some kind of intellectual here, which I'm not. But I really didn't know, and what I did feel very strongly was that if I kept the word as a working title, that I could make the poem. That if I actually went to my dictionary and saw that what the word meant, the poem wouldn't happen. So it came, Pat and I were speaking about this morning, it was like doing a crossword or perhaps putting a jigsaw together. The poem came together in pieces. Here and there I experimented with rhyme to see what would happen. And very strangely, what the experimentation did with rhyme resulted in was that I discovered that metathesis was the right word for a poem which concerns itself with the randomness of life. I mean, you can plan only so many things, and if you even move one tiny detail around in a day or in a life, everything can change. And I suppose moving a word, a letter around in a word, can have the same effect. So I'm going to read Metathesis to start. While she's waiting for the lights to change at City Hall, the storm begins. The wind speeds the river, lifts dust, yet traffic holds her captive on the pavement. Pulsating at the red to green, the seconds counted out, her body's dream-stuck lag behind her ticking heels. The rush her heart's dictating to the slow, too slow of other people. She at last steps off the street. Descended to the car park's underworld, on her knees she tips her bag, finds keys, her ticket, and becomes Persephone, reversing fast into the dark. Spinning on to where she shouldn't go, but has to, doesn't care. 2. She knows the story of Iris, rainbow sent to a goddess with a god's request. An order, really, it occurs to her on the platform. The station almost empty. A gape in the bird-flecked seascape roof, now holding those 7 curved colours. the rest of the sky pale beyond the glass. Easter Monday passes, cold as Persephone, who craved the warmth of red, orange, yellow, the green, blue, indigo, violet, fast dyed by the tears of her goddess mother. The ground beneath her quaking. She can't see the train, still miles away. The Ferris dance as track locks into track at its advance. 3. Beyond the window's skin, a scattered white. The many weathers March defines as light. All that's left of the storm now, its surface of flotsam on the river she can't hear. Up-tumbled desperately for mud, it's dragged back to an underworld that's mapped and snagged in the hollow of her cup. Silted there are tea leaf letters that she tilts, reshapes to other words, different orders. The 3 attempts to change which she, Persephone, can only know. Bare trees that never felt the rip and snap until it was too late. That never had the chance to turn about in seasons she has made. Can't live without. I'm going to go back to my first collection, Snow Negatives, for a very old poem. But one that came to me as a word as well, and without depressing everyone, this word came into my head in the months after my father's death. Now, I have a theory that everyone in Ireland anyway has written at least one poem in their life. And they'll usually people that even profess to hate poetry will stand up at a funeral and say, I felt compelled to write this, I don't know why. Unfortunately, this poem, or maybe fortunately, didn't arrive in time for the funeral, but it came to me in the months after, when I thought of the things my father had left me. And number one amongst those was his fear of heights. He was, seriously, I'm a woman who can't even stand on a chair to change a light bulb. And my poor father, God help him, he was similarly afflicted. This is vertigo, in memory of my father. It's not the only thing you left me. This free-falling, light-headed lurch towards nothing in particular. Nor is it the best you could have wished for me. That I should be gripped by the same plain fear you couldn't even name in the end. In the end, I tried to sound it out for you, looking down from my great height, feeling 2 seasons shake this tree, this monstrous, bluey-green, undying obscenity. My toes curled at the thought of flight. No, it was never your intention to leave me, to go like that, stepping off into air, the colour of your honest eyes. Quietly surprised at first, I imagine, by the ease with which you went spinning down as the ground came up, while the wind sang the years backwards in your head. I think I shall go to map of the next poem. Yes. Now, as I said, poems arrive sometimes in the strangest places. This one came to me in Beaumont Hospital. Oh God, I'm being depressing, aren't I? Believe me, it didn't turn out depressing. It turned out happy. But this was in Beaumont Hospital on the night before a procedure. Now we're talking about words. Procedure is such a neutered word, isn't it? I mean, really, it can mean anything. And nobody was telling me anything. But the title of this poem doesn't actually appear anywhere in the body of the poem. But it swims over 2 other words, which are very much there, submerged. And all I will say about this is that the procedure and what happened afterwards, even though it looked quite bad at the time, turned out to be as benign as the creature in the title. This is Dolphin, for Sheena Mar, friend in the West. Until then, you believed in your mirror, its tepid rendering of body, face, shape. Slurred by a lapse of muscle behind retina, perhaps. You'd had all that time to get used to what it told while you hovered, a ghost in your own skin, afloat on an ocean of moods. But she sent you a map of a different sort, your friend in the West. with blue-inked waves, a blunt-ended pier, a hint of wind around that little boat's taut sail, a sun with a smile implied in its halo of spiked rays, her house marked with an X. Before a word, not anywhere, in your doctor's voice, arrives with the phone's unknowing tone to take you quietly. You're scanning the wall for a simple confirmation of yellow. Daffodil? Custard? You notice how it stays the same shade chosen from a chart. You find your mind ask, but what else is there besides the heart? Later, on the phone again, you are trying to explain why you won't make it to the West next week, when she begins to spin a story about swimming off White Strand, how the surface sea had opened to show teeth. Huge, she says, a huge, sleek, grey, then a word you've never heard her use before or since, to describe her fright in such a presence. And you're laughing, laughing, laughing for the first, the only time that long weekend, as if your life depended on it. A couple of years ago, there was a fashion for list poems. Does anyone remember that? I remember reading with a poet in Dublin, no names, no scandal, who proceeded to read a poem which he had kind of worked out of his grocery shopping list to bring into Tesco. It was really well done, but they were everywhere. And then, not that long ago, I was in a workshop with another poet who also read a list poem, and the word kind of lodged itself in the head again, and I produced this poem, which is a sort of list of lists. List. Branches slant vibrato after the blackbird has flown. An only child's stone heels beneath a seesaw, ground around her. A small boat's keel in salt water, prow down in a big tide. The half-moon's silver, tilted, dipped in an inky sky. Those 5 words glanced across a table's width. The balance shift that lists them on the dark chart of your eyes. I'm going to finish up with the poem while we're talking about where poems come from. This particular one arrived on a bank holiday Monday, and a morning when I should have been lying in bed having a lie on. The last 3 lines were written across the front of my head. And I then proceeded to do that backwards out of the bedroom to get a notebook, a dance that all writers are prone to do, and that all the poor unfortunates that live with us have to put up with. And on the way to the notebook, the title came to me. And then I thought, well, it is indeed a dance, this life, and most of us, most of the time, are trying to dance as quickly as we can. This is choreography. Turning twice, I shimmied, slipped my skin like a snake. A shake was all it took to pass old colours I could slake off into this big deal of a dust bowl. Just one small step for a woman, an effort at a life before it's put away again, aside. Being honest, I would say that it's a side of me I've never met before, an underskin I've been living in forever, all my life. Slant observed, I'd hoped that it would pass out each and every can-kicked step to what's been planned in chalk. To this, I must admit, plead guilty. To all of this, and every televised bright day I've set outside the passions that I have within my upstep, downstride. In the runaround, my limpid skin declines towards the easier to take the bypass ravelled outskirts of my life. And make no mistake here, it's my life. In spite of wars I never asked for, this and that disease, all of which I hope will pass without much damage. And it's still inside the bounds of reason that it isn't my skin and my decision as to what my next step might be in this dance's brittle quick step. The choreography isn't complex. Life twists arms, shakes legs, a neck-length stretch of skin has served me well enough through most of this. And I can say that, almost, with no rancour. Aside from moments I let go of now. I'll pass, and ask that you too please allow to pass. Blue planet, oyster moon, fierce stars. One more step and I know I'll be on the other side of money, traffic, time, a type of life that pirouettes to this, to this, to this big, stupid heart that beats beneath my skin. Almost there. I twist aside to let myself pass mind and bones and skin. I'm ready for the step into a life I'm dying to describe. It's like this. Thank you.
Listen, thanks very much. It's great to be here. I feel, in a way, I feel somehow like an imposter in this, but I think that's part of the gig, isn't it? Of anybody who writes poems and then tries to stand up and try to say interesting things about them and remember where they came from, and possibly even more interestingly, when they ended. I've realised in the process of putting this anthology together with Eugene O'Connell, whose idea it was, and it had been growing with him for some time. But in the process of putting it together, I realised, just a terrible thing to say, this is a great ad for a book, that my attention was already going on to the other end of the mechanism, beyond where it starts to where it ends. What is the moment when the maker of anything decides to abandon ship, or to freeze it and stick it into the bottom drawer, or to press it between the pages of the first edition by X? You know what I mean? That becomes really interesting. How do you get out? And I remember having a very drunken, so my version of it will have to stand, conversation many years ago with Dermot Healy, who's been, then was and still is more now, one of my favourite, certainly Irish writers of any time. And he gave me great drunken advice one night. And that was that when you start a draft of a poem, do not stop till you write the last line. Brilliant advice. It is worth your while having come here today to hear me pass on that. I'm serious. Because what it does is it gives you something to argue with, to engage with, to worry about, etc. But it has this, it fakes a unit. Now, it doesn't mean that afterwards, when you go back into it, when you strip down and put the togs back on again and you dive in, that you're going to be in the same river at all. That's the fascination and the annoyance of it. But it means you're going to be in a river. There's going to be sufficient amounts of hydrogen and oxygen, and the mix is going to be approximately 2 to 1, and that it will hold in some bizarre way. So good night now, or good morning. So yeah, how does it end? How does it end? With a whimper, I suppose, rather than the bang. And so the interesting thing is, if I can do this, if I can remember, not to single out, well, of course I'm going to do that, one particular contribution to the book, but one that kind of has meant a lot to me, or has told me something. I just want to read you one little paragraph out of it. It's Enda Coyle-Greene, writing about her poem, The Copious Dark. I can't read my own, so I'll read this and it's much more interesting. This is the prose piece. And by the way, just to be perverse, the introductions follow the poems, which is maybe advice to all of you readers and etc. out there. Once I was on a bus on winding roads in Virginia, and I saw a lovely black girl waiting in dusk where the bus stopped, and the embrace when her lover got off. That gave me the idea of writing about darkness, nightfall, as the natural element of home and closeness, as opposed to the smooth persistence of artificial light. This is underneath, she's talking about the poem, a poem about the great unfairness of work between men and women, men exiled from their families when their bodily strength is wanted by the machine. Women left raising children alone and surviving on miserable part-time wages. Right? But the jump from the two things is what's so interesting. That she's on a bus, like, I always find myself talking about him in situations like this, like Richard Hugo in that fantastic little book of essays called The Triggering Town, where he's spotting things out bus windows and imagining who the people are, where they're going next. So she's moving from this embrace between this young black girl and her partner or boyfriend or something. And she jumps from there into writing a poem that she discovers is about work and how we're enslaved to work. So that romantic moment is the beginning, but look where the end is, or even the halfway point on it. That's what's really interesting. And I love that line by Wallace Stevens, ignorance is one of the sources of poetry. That it's the jump, it's getting from where you think you are, and that has to feel sufficiently unitary to hold my interest. Getting from there to a place where you realise you don't know what the heck's going on. And that's the interesting trajectory. So, and speaking of ignorance, I'm highly qualified in this department. So I think what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is I find one way to end poems is to show them to people. That's one way to wipe them out of existence. But I think it's always important to try to have something that's not finished or not quite there. There's something about saying it to someone else that tells you something, that tells you where you're wrong, in the sense of wrong-footed. So I just want to read you a couple of things, and they have all scribbles on them even since this morning. So I won't be upset if you don't love me again. This is called, it was called Jealousy, then it was called Rivalry. But actually, I think that's probably what it's about. That's not the title, you know. So it's all process stuff is fascinating and nerdy, right? And you're not here because you're normal people. You're here because you're nerds, right? This is kind of the Comic Con convention, really. You know what I mean? And behind me, I'm sure there's all kind of Pokemons of John Hewitt with and without pipe. You know, you can make it go like that. So, in that spirit, right, the last will and testament of the Emperor Qin instructed his eldest son, Fusu, to kill himself. Horrified and broken-hearted, but obedient to the end, Fusu did. Fusu, the heavens stalled in their turning for you. The sea held its breath. Yet out of the nightingale forest, no sound of warning, no reprieve. Thus was the way made clear for Hu Hai, Fusu's keenest rival and Qin's younger son, he whose skills as a calligrapher were second to none. Here's two poems about trains, one being stuck on a train and the other being stuck off a train. And it's a big creative decision which one of those to read first. So we're off the train. Well, no, we're on the train. Don't be trying to get ahead of yourselves. We're on the train first. Stalled train. In the listening carriage, someone's phone cries out for help. A student frisks himself. A woman weighs her handbag. then stares into space. This train is going nowhere. We've stood here now so long, the cattle in this field have dared come right up close to chew and gaze. We tell ourselves that somewhere down the line things we cannot understand are surely taking place. The future almost within reach. And into each small telephone that rings or shudders now like doubt, we commit, if still in whispers, our hopes and fears, our last known whereabouts. And this is a poem also about a train, but it's also about that, it's about a gap in it. Well, there's the mind, the gap, isn't it? But it's about that kind of gap where if it's not your own ignorance, it's the prevention, it's the obstacle of getting to where you thought you wanted to go. Because otherwise you're in the danger that my attraction to poetry is flirting with autobiography. That's what I'm interested in. I'm no more interested in my autobiography, and I don't expect you to be interested in it. But it is the place from which things start, and it's the known from which, you know. But it's not enough. It's never enough. Station Road in Sutton. Station Road, Sutton. And it's a level crossing. There is that moment when the barrier comes down on Station Road, when the train to Howth has passed and nothing happens. When the men in lycra vests and shorts on their blade-thin wheels look round and through each other. When the yummy mums with their dozy, school-bound offspring by their sides are trussed up in the seats behind like dolls. Glance down one more time to check the time. When the very birds up on that ever slack tangle of cables overhead shuffle 2 steps left or 1 step right. When the sea retreats and only sunlight advances along the track. When something in the chest unlocks or shifts and you find you're no longer waiting and the barrier lifts. Here's the funny thing as well, right? That this is the danger. You start thinking about the process, you can end up then having nothing to say at all. I mean, outside of the poems. I don't think that's a bad thing either. Sometimes you can disguise that you still haven't discovered what you're doing by telling yourself or by telling others. I don't know. I'm telling you that at the start. That would be on the t-shirt. A hitchhiker. All I did was drive. That's the line. That could be the poem, couldn't it? You know? All I did was drive. No promise of a bargain up ahead, hard or soft. The coastal skies full of colour, reflected from the slowly lowered disk of sun and the dust of a volcanic interruption that all that week had caused the run on ferry tickets. Commotion in the airports, and for one good friend led to a love affair in France with a girl like himself at a dead end and thinking, if this is it, let's dance. The radio played. I didn't really care, but the key was minor, sad and slow, so that when we stopped and the stranger, understandably I suppose, made to go, I thought he might be from another time and visiting ours. The way he took my hand to signal his appreciation, his smile a flicker in the air, if that, scarcely more than glimpse or apparition. No need for words. His wave in the rear view mirror, a flare, a flurry, a flight of birds. I find one that doesn't have too many bits of scribbly stuff on it, as my lads would call them. This is called, don't ask me to do it, learning to moonwalk. I mean, later in the night. Sometimes it's worth doing things the wrong way around. Stopping halfway, then moving backwards towards the starting line. Like the day I broke your favourite vase, and even as it fell, felt something close to horror, wisdom, you might say. Once it was clear that I'd lost it anyway. tugging me back, enough to watch it fall, to see it strike and splash across the bright tiled floor in so hypnotic an undoing that even as the moment found itself in awed completion, I already knew that I might watch it fall again and still again, yet fail to grasp that every blessed time this frozen sea of glass would not be kept intact, was doomed to shatter like a wave or flash of lightning, not so much an error as a simple twist of fate, conferring on this one unworthy man the gift of hindsight. This single lonely fool moonwalking now across the kitchen floor, the twin taps in the sink full on, his stadium audience calling out for more. Just read you something else. I'm looking to see if I've written anything interesting on this bit of paper, but I actually can't make out a word. It says something about blindfolds, but that could be, I have a habit of waking up in the middle of the night, you know, and writing down the secret to the universe. And it is blindfold. I'll read you this because I just noticed this morning that the poem is dedicated. The poem is dedicated to someone who died just 10 years ago now. And I'm shocked to realise it. Sargon Boulos was an Iraqi poet who lived in Germany for 20 odd years of his life, and in the States for a period before that, and who had left Iraq by, as a lot of people did at the time, by getting up in the night and walking through the desert under threat of not just capture but execution. And he and I became kind of friends for a period in correspondence, and then he was part of a festival that I ran for a period in Dublin. And this is just a small thing. It's such an obvious thing, but it's again back maybe to ignorance. He said to me something one night where we had sat up late in my house in Dublin, and we were having a drink, and it was a beautiful summer's evening. It was June, end of June, early July, not far from now actually. And it had gotten dark the way it does this time of year, very slowly. And we'd gradually found ourselves looking at our own reflections, because we were in my kind of kitchen extension situation, right? So we were looking out, and then suddenly we were looking in. And it's just a moment. And in the course of this long, rambling conversation, he said to me just these 3 words that I remembered, and probably like that, blindfold, wrote them down. And he said, immigrants open shops. Those 3 words. Immigrants open shops. And it made such an impression on me afterwards. It was like the history of Western, at least, civilization. It's all there. Capitalism, how to move between rankings, caste systems. It's all in those 3 words. The poem is not that good, but as I say, you'll remember the title, so I can't lose it. Again, all the best things are, I'm into recycling. Immigrants open shops. Immigrants open shops, Sargon says. In countries where they take in refugees, that's what they do. They open shops. To sell something, there's no real need to speak. Someone enters, points at this and that, or finds what he wants on a shelf, and all you need is half a dozen words to serve him. Yes, no, 7 euros, 10. He's counting fingers now. Words a fool could master in a morning could be singing in 2 days. And maybe thank you or see you tomorrow. Immigrants open shops, Sargon says. Immigrants open shops, Sargon says. A teenage girl perched high on a stool, happy to try the few new words she's learnt after her first week in the local school. But when they pass through the bead curtains into the back room, when they step back from the till, or when friends or family drop by for a taste of the old country, then it's the old language still. A newspaper left open on the table, the TV always on the high shelf, making the drunk who stumbles in by accident wonder if he's the immigrant now himself. Immigrants opened shops, Sargon says, 8 years ago already. Hard to believe. The troops back then still gathered on the border of the homeland he hadn't seen in 20 years. One for the road, he asks. I shrug, why not? As my mother says, we'll be a long time dead. Sargon smiles. I'll remember that, my friend. But he's far away this evening, lost in himself, gazing out now into our tidy garden through his pale reflection in the glass, a nervous shopkeeper as night approaches, hearing ominous voices in the dark. I'll just read you one more, and thanks very much. Thanks to Anne-Marie and to Paul Paul's McAvinci and Maddern, particularly, and to Hilary and the whole team here, I think particularly the volunteers. I think we all know that with festivals, that even if you have a really strong, and you have to have a really strong kind of core team who hold with it from year to year, you're so dependent on the energy and the enthusiasm and the provocation and the little bit of chaos and the sexual tension and whatever else you're lucky enough to get, you know, when you get a team of volunteers in a room at a certain hour of the night. No, but it's fantastic, and there are festivals that are smaller and bigger than this festival that don't have that same sense of something. Yeah, there. Jesus, when you walk in. Oh my God. No, it's great. But so look, thanks very much and congratulations. Keep taking the pills. All right. This is called the inverse wave. I didn't read the bloody poem. Does it have to? I don't have to. No, I don't. Actually, don't. Buy the book, you cheapskates. No, I know, but you know what I mean. No, I feel like I've already talked about all that. What else is on this list? Feed things, it says. It could be feel things, but that would be my mother talking to me. From the back of, you know. Okay, I'll leave it all. That's too deep altogether. The inverse wave. Every sound in the town he recorded. The river half full. The kids in afternoon playgrounds. The fool stood out on the street to sing. The believers and all of the certain doomed driving to work, eating their takeouts, beached in the midsummer sun. All of it, all of them. And late one night he made a digital negative. An inverse wave, which the following evening he broadcast so loud on his stereo, driving around with the windows rolled down and the volume up full, that its sound cancelled out the originals, and everything went still. The factories, the traffic, the games and the arguments, the inside and the out, the known world's perfect din and constant roar, until all that was left was two lovers in darkness, whispering together words never uttered before. Thanks a million.